Christmas on Jane Street, Chapter 8. Christmas in Vermont. Patty and I woke up before dawn on Christmas morning in our very own bed in Vermont. The first thing I did before brushing my teeth and changing out of my pajamas was to rush down the stairs and throw open the front door. It had been 30 years since I started my Christmas this way. But when I was a kid, I obsessed with this ritual zealously. Every Christmas morning, before checking out the bulges in my stocking or surveying the presents under the tree, I would dash outside to see if it had snowed and whether I could spot any reindeer or runner tracks left by Santa's sleigh. I didn't know what possessed me that morning to be a kid again, but that's how it happened. I should say tried to throw open the front door. The fact is, it would not budge. You see, I was pressing against a mound of snow. As we'd pulled into the driveway the night before, light flakes had begun to dot the windshield, but only then the following morning did I realize that the flakes had mounted to a storm. I shoved the door open and looked outside. "Patty," I called, "come look." Patty padded over to me in her house slippers, carrying 2 steaming cups of tea, a specialty blend from Jane Street Friends. We stood at the door, sipping our tea, staring at what lay before us. Snow had draped the evergreens around our house and formed a virgin carpet on the lawn. In the distance, only the green mountains and the gray sky of dawn interrupted the great white swath covering miles of fields and farms and homes. Do you see why I picked this background picture? Snow blanketed every barn, fence, and house in sight and acted as a great equalizer. It camouflaged all flaws and unified the landscape into one harmonious whole. It brought people together, too, just like my Christmas trees did in New York City. Unplowed, the road in front of our house was piled with 2 feet of snow with higher drifts at the fences. Save for a few power and telephone lines, there were almost no visible signs of civilization in this rural Vermont countryside. You'd have to expect to see a horse-drawn sleigh filled with carolers happen along, dragging a tree behind. Though white Christmases were not unusual in Vermont, a Christmas Eve snowstorm was. "Can you believe it?" Patty said, looking at me incredulously. It was more of a comment than a question. She and I were both thinking the same thing. What if? What if we hadn't left New York City when we did? What if the storm had come earlier, when we were en route? It was a blessing we'd made it home when we did. If the timing had been different, we might still have been on Jane Street, or more likely yet, stuck at some welcome center somewhere, making time with other stranded travelers. "I'm so glad we're home safe and sound. Tomorrow, after the excitement of Christmas wears down, we can shake off the needles from the season and get on with it," I said, pulling her close. Shaking out the needles from the season was our private family expression for this brief period, the aftermath of Jane Street. It was a cozy, lazy time for our family, flopped together on the couch, catching up on reading and mail, taking a giggle, talked and giggled a lot, and felt happy and relieved that the season was finally over. It was also a time of readjustment to the country and a letting go of the excitement and energy on Jane Street. As the children slept, Patty and I prepared our home for the big day ahead. Patty set the few remaining candles from Ellie's stock on the dining room table and placed one on every windowsill downstairs. I shoved a narrow path to the camper, and while I stepped inside, saw that most precious cargo had weathered the journey safely. Before leaving Manhattan, Ellie and Henry had selected a Christmas tree, a lovely bushy Douglas fir, and wrapped it in a favorite old quilt that had once belonged to their grandmother, Gilmartin. They wanted the tree to rest comfortably on the ride home. When I lifted the tree from its protective covering, I saw that it had shed a few needles and that all the branches remained intact. I hoisted the trunk, Patty took the midsection, and we carried the tree into the house. On the stoop, I sawed off the thick slice of the tree trunk, knowing it would be the last cut of the season. Back inside, working as quietly as possible as to not disturb the children, Patty and I set up the tree in the stand. We hung ornaments, many of them handmade through the years by the children, out of dry macaroni and cardboards, pine cone, cotton balls, and construction paper. We took special care with older pieces from Patty's mother, hanging them on high boughs out of reach of Timmy Santos and Patches. When Patty was in the other room, I removed from my toolbox a special package I'd bought in the city. I speared only the cellophane overwrap, lifted out its contents, and began hanging its long silvery strands on the branches. When Patty returned with several shopping bags full of presents, she stopped short in amazement. "But you don't like tinsel," Patty said, and she's talking slowly as half speed, as she were making some kind of mental adjustment as she spoke. You do, I replied. I made my way out of the shop and put some finishing touches on my gift to Ellie. It was finished, really, except for a last-minute buffing. As I worked, I couldn't help but wonder if Ellie would like it and understand its message. When I was satisfied, I placed my gift for Ellie, cushioned with tissue paper, into a sturdy box, the old-fashioned kind made out of two distinct parts, a short top and a deep bottom. I went through a stack of newspaper cartoons, looking for the right strips to put on top. The Romp family tradition of wrapping gifts in the funnies began as an economy measure in the 60s, but several of my sisters and I kept it going long after we had homes of our own and could afford real wrapping paper. It was our touchstone with tradition, our way of celebrating our past while linking it with our future. To complete Ellie's package, I tied the package with some beautiful evergreen colored grosgrain ribbon that I'd found at a specialty shop near Jane Street. I placed my gift on the floor in an obscure spot in the corner behind the tree. I was hoping that Ellie wouldn't notice my present until all the other gifts had been unwrapped and all the excitement had died down. This way, the present would command her full attention. The kids slept until the sun shone full force into their windows. But once they opened their eyes and remembered that it was Christmas and that they were home in Vermont, it took them seconds to dress and come bounding down the stairs. Ellie dashed up to me, giving me a giant hug. "Merry Christmas," she said, her eyes sparkling in anticipation of what lay ahead. Just as quickly as she arrived, she ran back upstairs, returning with another shirt on, a red flannel almost identical to the one I was wearing. To correspond with my blue jeans, she had put on her beloved denim jumper. Fewer spectacles are more enjoyable than watching your children open presents on Christmas morning. I tell Patty and the kids every year that I would be happy receiving no gifts at all because my pleasure lies in watching them. Of course, every year they ignore my plea. The children started with their stockings, which were stuffed with oranges, walnuts, candy, small trinkets, and at least one tool for each child. It was a hammer in Henry's stocking with a note attached. "Santa says that next year you'll be old enough to nail the lights to the rack on Jane Street." For the first time that Christmas, little Timmy caught on to how our gift opening ritual worked. Each family member took his or her turn peeling off paper, with the rest of us acting as audience. Timmy would patiently wait his turn, but when it came, he held nothing back. He'd rip the paper covering his presents to shreds and wad it into a launchable missile. Once he emptied a box, he'd stomp on it and shriek if he made it pop. More seasoned in the ways of Christmas, Henry extended his role at center stage. When his moment came to unwrap, he would prolong the tension by pulling off the ribbon and removing the paper slowly. Then, when he discovered the item in the box, he'd reach with animated facial expressions, but delaying producing it, so everyone was left to wonder for a moment what it was and whether or not he liked the gift. Always entertaining, his theatrics were worth the wait. Ellie opened her gifts thoughtfully. She used scissors to cut the tape when the edges of the paper overlapped. Then, after removing the wrapping, neatly folded the sheets and slid them into a bag for reuse the following year. She detached the ribbons and bows from the package and put them in yet another bag. She finished all the housekeeping before getting to the reward. I could tell by the way her eyebrows arched when she first saw my gift that she knew it was for me. Perhaps reading my mind once again, or perhaps planning it all on her own, she saved my gift for last. When the moment came, Ellie tugged at the ribbon and raised the box top. She peered inside, still not knowing what to expect. Then she lifted out my present, handling it as if she were a museum curator unpacking some priceless, irreplaceable treasure. When the tissue fell away from what she was holding and the present was revealed, her mouth fell open and her eyes met mine. Was it disappointment on her face or some other emotion? It was hard to tell. Clearly, this was not what she was expecting. At that moment, my daughter reminded me how Patty had reacted earlier that morning to put my tinsel on the tree. Like her mother, Ellie seemed to be taking in not only her present, but a new version of me. "Oh, Daddy," she said at last, "a nutcracker." The toy nutcracker I carved stood 12 inches tall. He was garbed in complete dress uniform, a fancy red helmet and matching jacket with gold epaulets. Several impressive military medals adorned his jacket, and there was gold bands at his cuffs. He had black hair and curly mustache, a goatee, a nose that would have seemed too exceedingly prominent if it weren't for his mouth. Oversized, his mouth was unified by a deck of sharp pearly whites that carried just a hint of menace. Lifting the nutcracker coattails activated his jaw. I teased him I tested him out a number of times. Stick a walnut in his mouth and pull his coattails and the shell would crush, liberating its meaty center. Examining the nutcracker as thoroughly as an obstetrician checks a newborn, Ellie worked the nutcracker lever up and down. How did you ever? She started, gazing up at me in wonder. She had enough experience with wood carving herself to know how hard my job had been and just how difficult it must have been to keep my project a secret on Jane Street. Oh, it was nothing. And I thought you were making me something else, like a toolbox. That was my dream for you, not yours, I said. Once I realized that, I scrapped my plan and decided to make what you wanted. It is said that change never really happens overnight, and that may be right. Perhaps genuine change works its way through your system gradually, chipping away at barriers in your unconscious and making breakthroughs when you least expect them. But it sure did feel that way at that time. It felt like I'd been struck by powerful force that night at the party, transformed into a new person. Then and there, I vowed to part company with my old self. I decided to give Henry the gift he was coveting, the one I'd been making all year for Ellie, the toolbox. I decided to make Ellie the thing she wanted most, a nutcracker. The gift was meant to be a blessing for Ellie to pursue whatever dreams she dreamed, even if they departed from my own. As long as she had it, the gift would remind her of that big night at the nutcracker and all the obstacles she'd overcome to get there. With that gift, I'd made a promise to myself to stand behind her wherever she might go in life. Ellie was sitting on the couch in front of the tree when I squatted before her, my face almost level with the nutcrackers. I was one of those people who had a hard time apologizing. I would know in my heart when the need was there, but it was never easy to express in words. I took a deep breath and then the plunge. If I made it hard on you this year, I want to tell you how sorry I am, I started. I've always known that I should let you be your own person and pursue your dreams. But in my heart, I felt that if you went places I wasn't going, you were leaving me behind. Tears swelled up in Ellie's eyes as I spoke. When you didn't want to go to the nutcracker, I thought you were mad at me. I reached for my daughter and held her tightly. Ellie, I said, no matter where you go in life, no matter what you do, I'll always love and support you. I consider you a miracle, always have, just as I did the day you were born. This nutcracker is here to remind you how I feel. I'm only human, so even if I mess up, he'll carry the message. He'll never forget. Just as suddenly as her tears had come, they were gone. Know what? She said brightly. Next year, when we go to Jane Street, if I sell twice as many candles, maybe 3 times as many as this year, and I can afford it, she paused, studying me intently. Would you go if I paid to take you and the family to the nutcracker? I didn't answer her immediately, but a smile broke out on my face so she could tell I would offer no objection. Ellie wasted no time spinning out a new dream. Even Timmy, he'll be old enough then. I'm just dying for you to see it, especially the tree. You don't think I'd seen enough trees in what I do? I kidded. You're going to take me to Lincoln Center to see a tree? But this tree is like no other, Ellie started. She could tell I was teasing, so she kept on, becoming more extravagant as she proceeded. It grows like Jack and the Beanstalk. It almost comes alive on stage, just like our trees. I wouldn't just go to see a tree, but I would go to see the ballerinas and the dance of the Sugar Plum Fairies, and I'd definitely go to see you all dressed up in your fancy black velvet outfit, if it still fits. Well, if I'm buying the tickets, you'd better be dressed right. You mean you wouldn't take me as I am? I said, feigning indignation and snapping out my suspenders. No way, she said. You'd better start getting your outfit ready. Coat, tie, dress pants, the works. I haven't worn a tie since my wedding, or was it my high school prom. In the past, I would have raised an objection, told her I wouldn't go because I didn't feel comfortable dressing up. Or it might have been a matter of principle, my problem with spending so much money on one fleeting pleasure. I would have found a reason. But at that moment, I knew better. I would put on a coat and tie for my daughter. I would take an evening off from the stand. I would be by her side, cheering on her dreams and decisions, pitching in to help wherever life took her. Sure, I was the man of the house and took pride in my role as provider. And just as I hoped and prayed in the start of the season, tree sales had broken all records that year, getting us over a major hump financially. But I knew that Christmas morning I'd remember this season not for what I'd made, but for what I learned. Ellie's gift to me that year was showing me how to be a good father. Now that she set out to teach me a lesson, not that she set out to teach me a lesson or even knew in advance what I needed to know. It just worked out that way. I'd always thought I understood what being a father was all about. My version had included spending lots of time with my children and teaching them the fundamentals. And those are good things. I hate to admit it, though, but I see now that I'd gotten a little smug somewhere along the way. Just look at how great my children were, I said to myself. How bright, how considerate, how well behaved, and well liked they were. In hindsight, I realized that in Ellie, I'd seen a miniature version of myself. It had been easy to love her that way. It had been harder when she was behaving like someone else entirely, someone I wasn't comfortable or familiar with. My struggle with Ellie made me think about my customers. They came back to my stand year after year and considered themselves my friends. Because they liked the way I treated them, I gave them rope, I let them be themselves. It's strange how you can have a special gift like mine and apply it so effectively in one area of your life, but so ineffectively in another. I had turned my talent for people with my customers, but not with my family. The gift I received from Ellie that Christmas was a lesson in how to give without expecting anything in return. Not a tree sale or a helper, nor someone to take care of me in my old age. Once I really got the gift, once I really understood it, I was overcome by a feeling of headiness. It felt a bit like giving away the wreaths and trees on Jane Street. I learned that Christmas that what I needed most was to learn how to give for the sake of giving. Once I learned to give Ellie away, to give her to herself, I had embraced the true meaning of Christmas. For some reason, deep within her, Ellie needed to go to the Nutcracker that Christmas, and ever since she'd gone, I'd watched her come alive like my Christmas trees after I snipped the string. Ellie had told me the first day on Jane Street that we'd learned by trying new things, and she was right. She needed to learn by testing her wings. That was precisely what she was doing, and now she had my blessing. Ellie was holding the Nutcracker in her arms when suddenly she jumped off the couch and took center stage on the floor. From the way she was standing, holding her shoulders back and her back erected like a ballerina, I wondered if she weren't imagining herself as part of the Clara on stage at Lincoln Center. She thrust the Nutcracker up in the air and then did a perfect pirouette on toe on her tennis shoe. As I watched her, she appeared graceful and ladylike, looking once again more like a woman she would become than the tomboy she still was. Catching her fire, I jumped up to join her where she was standing. I'll go to the Nutcracker next year, I said, wanting with my whole heart and soul to go. Suddenly, the opportunity to see the Nutcracker, this ballet that had changed my daughter's life, seemed like an enormous privilege, one of life's greatest. Our whole family will. We'll all be there together. Ellie gazed up at me, and her eyes radiating happiness, anticipation, and the ultimate contentment of a child who's well-loved. Once we shake out the needles from the season, I said, we'll have an entire year to get ready for the big night. And that is the end of Christmas on Jane Street. Thanks so much for listening.